Hi everyone, welcome back. In this lecture, we'll create a simple Spring Boot Hello World REST API. Well, creating REST APIs using Spring Boot is very simple. Alright, so let's head over to the IntelliJ IDEA and let's quickly create a simple Spring Boot REST API. Well, go to the main package over here, and within that, let's quickly create one more package and let's call it as controller. Well, within a controller package, we keep all the Spring MUC controllers. Now let's go ahead and let's create a Spring MUC controller. Well, right click on the controller package, new, and then choose Java class, and let's give class name as a Hello World Controller. Well, notice here the naming convention for the Java class, Hello World Controller. Well, whenever we create a Spring MUC controller, we always use controller as a suffix for this class name. And here Hello World is nothing but a resource, followed by controller is a suffix for this resource. Okay, so this is the Hello World controller. Some of the developers also use the naming convention like Hello World resource, but in typical Spring MUC projects we use the naming convention like Hello World controller. Okay, we always use controller string as a suffix for a controller name. Okay, now we have Hello World controller. Go ahead and hit enter. Now we have created a Java class. Let's make this Java class as a Spring MUC controller by using @controller annotation. Well, let's go ahead and let's annotate this class with @controller annotation. And notice here @controller annotation is a stereotype annotation from org.springframework.stereotype package. So let's go ahead and let's select this annotation over here. Well, whenever we develop the RESTful web services using Spring MUC, all the REST APIs return a JSON to the client, right? So in order to convert a Java object into JSON, we have to use @response_body annotation. So let me go ahead and let me use @response_body annotation over here. Well, whenever we develop the RESTful web services using Spring MUC, we always use these two annotations, isn't it? We use @controller annotation to make this controller class as a Spring MUC controller, and we use @response_body annotation to convert a response from Java object to JSON, and that JSON will be again written into HTTP response. Well, as we know that whenever we develop the RESTful web services using Spring MUC, we have to create a controller class and we have to annotate this controller class with these two annotations, isn't it? Spring team thought like, why not we create a shortcut single annotation? It internally uses these two annotations, right? So Spring team released @REST controller annotation. It internally uses these two annotations. For example, let me remove these two annotations, and here let me use @REST controller annotation over here. Well, Spring 4.0 released this @REST controller annotation, and this annotation is a combination of @controller and @response_body annotation. For example, if we dive into the source code of this @REST controller annotation, here you can able to see this annotation is annotated with @controller annotation as well as @response_body annotation. Okay, so @REST controller annotation is nothing but it is a combination of controller and response_body annotation. Well, instead of using these two annotations, we can use the shortcut single annotation, that is @REST controller annotation. Alright, perfect. Let's go back to Hello World controller. Now we have annotated our Hello World controller class with the @REST controller annotation. Okay, just remember, whenever you want to develop RESTful web services using Spring MUC, you have to annotate a class with the @REST controller annotation. Now this class becomes a Spring MUC REST controller. Within this REST controller, we can create the REST APIs. Now within a Hello World controller, let's go ahead and let's create the REST API. So creating a REST API is pretty simple. We just have to create a method, and we use Spring annotations to make that method as a REST API. Okay, perfect. So here just type the method public, and let's give return type of the method as a string, and let's give method name as Hello World. Perfect. And let's return some string, something like Hello World. Now we have created simple Java method. Let's make this Java method as a REST API using Spring annotation. Well, this is going to be a HTTP GET request, right? So let's go ahead and let's use @get mapping annotation to handle HTTP GET request. Well, basically we use @get mapping annotation to map incoming HTTP GET request to this method. Okay, and next let's go and let's configure the URL for this REST API. So here let's pass the URI something like hello-world. Perfect. So whenever a client want to access this REST API, then client have to use this URL. For example, http://localhost:/hello-world. Perfect. So whenever a client want to access this REST API, then client have to use this URL. Alright, perfect. So let me copy this URL. Now let's go and let's run the Spring Boot application and let's see how this REST API works. So let me stop the existing server and let me start the Spring Boot application again. And look at here, our Spring Boot application is up and running in an embedded Tomcat server on port 8080. Well, this is the get REST API, so we can access this REST API using browser. So let's go to a browser. In a new tab, just paste this URL, that is http localhost:/hello-world, and hit enter, and there we go. You can able to see the client got a response from the REST API. And if you can see the REST API, this REST API returns hello world string, isn't it? And you can see in the browser the client got hello world in a response. It means that we have successfully developed Spring Boot Hello World REST API and it is working as expected. Well, creating the REST APIs using Spring Boot is very simple. We just have to create a Spring MVC controller and we need to annotate it with @REST controller annotation, and within a controller we need to create the Java methods and we need to annotate it with appropriate HTTP annotations. For example, this annotation is used to handle HTTP GET request. So there are a couple of annotations like @post mapping annotation, @put mapping annotation, @delete mapping annotation. So these annotations we use to handle a different HTTP request like HTTP GET request, post request, delete request, put request, isn't it? Well, we'll see how we can use all these annotations in upcoming lectures. In next lecture, we'll create a Spring Boot REST API. It returns a Java bean as a JSON to the client. Alright, great. I will see you in the next lecture.